So hello and welcome to the first week of In Search of Deeper Learning, the book study that we're going to try to do asynchronously. So we've been through this before with groups and have a set of questions that you'll find on the flip grid. And then generally it's broken out for 8 weeks. We're going to combine 2 weeks at a time in every entry so that you can go through it in 4 weeks if you like, or take the entire 8, whatever speed you'd like. We're going to do a video for every week / chapter set. And we're going to discuss amongst ourselves, Harriam and Stephen and I. And then we hope that what you will do is respond with video feedback or video questions or statements. And over time, we can asynchronously respond back and forth to each other and engage in a bit of our own deeper learning as we go through this, rather than just try to take it as consumption. This is largely unscripted, and we are new at this. So good luck, welcome. And we're going to try to keep each of these down to about 10 minutes or so. The first week covers the introduction and chapter 1, which is which is the state of deeper learning in American high school. So it's really background. And I guess one thing we'd like to do is just kick it off right away. I'll ask each, Stephen and Harriam, and then I'll respond. Well, what was one just key takeaway that you found in the introduction, or one quote or something that just jumped out at you, Stephen, in these first 2 sections?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is maybe putting my researcher hat on a little bit, but I just think that the whole premise of this book, and it's kind of a very honest beginning where these 2 researchers go off in search of schools that have been touted as being innovative, and they have this like long list of schools. I think it was like, I forget, 30 something schools that they thought they were going to go to. And they find out very quickly that almost none of the schools that they were told to go and look at as being like, bastions of deeper learning, and like you can go to any classroom and it'll just be this amazing, moments of inquiry everywhere you look, and the students are all, it's like a utopian kind of thing. And then they find out that these schools are very, very inconsistent, right? And so they have all this money, right? Because they're like Harvard researchers and they have this big grant, and then they realize that they're going to go to these schools and not find what they're looking for. And so they kind of retool their thinking. And I think that the story is like sobering, and it's also interesting that they end up with what I think it's like 3 schools that end up becoming the focus of the book. But then there are these other pockets of within like big, what they call them, like big public comprehensive high schools. They find that there are these pockets of deeper learning, but to do it holistically throughout a school is extremely hard and extremely rare. So that's what stuck out at me. And then also that it was just like a 10-year process. Like this book is the product of like nearly 10 years of research, which is just crazy to me.
Yeah, I would definitely consider myself a field researcher and a consumer and practical user of research. At 85%, I'm pretty comfortable, ready to go, which, in academia doesn't fly. And I think it was interesting hearing and then seeing some interviews with them where they kind of had to make that adjustment. They had to be like, okay, our pure research model really can't happen because this doesn't exist. But what can we glean out of this? And it turned out to be incredibly valuable. So Harriam, did you have anything that jumped out?
Well, I think 2 things for me. One, this isn't some newfangled idea. This has been around a very, very long time. And even in education terms, it's been around a long time. So that was my first takeaway as I looked at it. But I think the one thing, because I'm more of the practitioner side of things, and it's on page 44 when they talk of the biggest point to me is how do we navigate these waters, since we know that the system is not set up to do the very thing that we're trying to do. So how do you navigate those waters in that situation? How do you create when the system is set up to squash everything that you're trying to do?
Yeah, I think what we're finding with Real World Academy, right, is that you almost need to take it down to the dirt. Like we have to be freed from the system to build it back up research-based. Otherwise, you're just sort of spinning the dials. You had two things, Harry. Was that both of them?
That
or-
was the other one, that it wasn't new, and the other was, you know, that big point of how do we set ourselves up to navigate these waters, knowing the obstacles that are going to be ahead of us to be successful.
Excellent.
Yeah, and can I'm
Yeah.
just going to jump in while, you know, maybe take us already a little off the rails of our whatever our script or plan was. But I just want to say, I think that the cool thing about this book, and I think what makes it such a deep book, is that it's complicated, right? And so, because Harry, and you point out on page 44, they talk about the system from this like very big lens of like, there are these systems and they're just trying to kind of erode any innovation that happens. And, you know, it's a really sad statement that they say that on, you know, in that last bullet point, our most successful examples had to buffer themselves from external pressures. So that's like that's one lens. But then if you go back to a previous bullet point on page 42, they say achieving deeper learning is challenging because it requires significant unlearning. And I think they're really pointing to, and they even say, yeah, right there, for traditional teachers, right? There's a lot of unlearning that has to happen. So they take in the book, they go from like the big overhead systems perspective, but then they also say, look, and to your point, Phil, you've got to start with yourself as a teacher. You've got to start at the ground and recognize that this is like a really, really ingrained set of beliefs and assumptions. And it's not just, oh, if the, you know, the school district let me do this, or if regulations let me do this, it's like, oh no, it's what I believe as well. So.
Totally. Well, I keep coming back and have come back to pages 14 and 15 so many times because of the notes I took. And I'll just read quick 3 quotes that just pull the whole thing together for me and were staying for me through the whole book. On page 14, meaningful learning cannot be delivered to high school students like pizza to be consumed or videos to be observed. It talks about the student has to engage in labor and the difference between kids working and kids learning, right? And that whole concept of what does learning mean? And they give some examples of, can you reapply, you know, it's the things we know, as Harry said, you know, learning isn't the consumption, it's maybe the application. And so that, which gets me to the other piece on the next page where there's this phrase they use called cognitive apprenticeship. And really the teacher's job is to be better than the students at cognition and learning, and to get the students to become apprentices in those cognitive things, like how to learn. That's the focus, how to learn. Then the last piece is they talk about deeper learning, they believe posits itself at the intersection of 3 elements: mastery, identity, and creativity. And I think, Stephen, with your work on maker spaces, the creativity piece, and I think of some of the teachers focus on student-driven, you know, items, the identity, it has to have an identity. And then mastery, again, can you try and fail multiple times, but get to the place where you can master it? So to me, that intro and that conversation, that vernacular doesn't exist for the most part in education, which we have just a few minutes, but Stephen, I'll kick over to you on that vernacular piece, because I think one piece that you keep coming back to is the grammar of schooling. Talk about that.
Man. Yeah, well, and everything you said, Phil, I feel like I want to respond to all of it. But yeah, the grammar of schooling is, you know, I think a really great concept, and it just pulls apart this idea that it calls attention to the fact that we all speak about learning using these words and these ideas like grade, like tests, like assessment, even teacher, student, you know, some of these other words. And I think we put them in, if you guys are going to eventually look at the questions that we made up, you know, curriculum, credit, course, grade, all of these things are just, again, so deeply embedded in how we make those things synonymous with education. And yeah, cognitive apprenticeship, such a great idea to say. It's almost like a callback to like blacksmithing or farming, or how people learn how to be expert chefs, right? And it says, no, we're teaching students how to think by modeling, not by having them consume things or take tests or accumulate points, right? So yeah, I guess I would just say, and this is hopefully a point that you all discuss on Flipgrid or amongst yourselves, you know, how can you actually talk about education without using any of these old terms?
Yep.
And could you use it to use the words mastery, identity, creativity instead?
It was driven home. In fact, today a presentation was done to administrators in the district about Real World Academy, and 2 of the 3 questions that were prevalent were, how do the credits work with NCAA requirements, and what levels of teacher certification are required? Like completely archaic, system driven, not at all related to student outcomes and deeper learning stuff. And I just thought, wow, it really enlightened me. The teachers that are at Real World Academy are having completely different conversations about their profession than their peers are right now. And that's telling. Not that those things aren't important, but they're not. If I had
Well,
one,
they're trying to, and that's part of the education's challenge, is they're trying to get equivalency.
yeah, or get it back in the box. How do I get this
Right.
back in the box that I understand?
Yeah.
And it ain't going back in the box.
It
So-
it reminds me of that scene from Apollo 13 where they have to connect the square peg to the round hole, and they only have like a toothpick and a Band-Aid and whatever that. And it's like, that's the question, is how does Real World Academy try to buffer those outside questions and not let it get back in their brains, right? Like that's challenging.
Well, time goes fast when we talk about this. I know that the 3 of us could talk for 3 or 4 hours on these, but we hope that this has gotten you started. We'd love to hear your feedback on this through Flipgrid. Just do a video and respond to anything that we've said or your own pieces that you found, and we'll look forward to folks responding back and forth to each other as you have time. And we hope that you'll join us for the next chapter, which will be chapter 2. Again, getting this ready to look at the different examples of deeper learning. Thank you.